My ex-husband's attorney sent the first letter on a Monday morning in March. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage at Langley Air Force Base eating a breakfast sandwich I had not had time to finish inside and listening to the rain tap against the roof. My personal phone buzzed. I glanced at it. Unfamiliar law firm name in the subject line. The kind of subject line that lands in your stomach before your brain has fully processed the words. I set the sandwich down. I read the letter twice. Then I folded it neatly inside my head the way you fold things you cannot deal with for another 4 hours, and walked into the building and did my job. That was the part nobody tells you about being a military officer. The ability to compartmentalize is not a personality trait. It is a survival skill you develop the way you develop calluses, through repeated friction over a long time, until the sensitive parts stop registering in the middle of things that require your full attention. I had been developing it for 16 years. Eric was about to discover it had gotten very good. My name is Monica Reyes. I am 43 years old. I served 16 years in the United States Air Force as an acquisitions and contracting officer, finishing my career as a lieutenant colonel before pinning on colonel. I managed defense procurement programs worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I oversaw teams of contracting specialists across multiple bases. I negotiated with defense industry partners who had entire legal departments dedicated to finding leverage in every conversation. I knew how to read a contract. I knew how to read people who used contracts as weapons. Eric and I were married for 8 years. We met when I was a captain stationed at Wright-Patterson. He was a structural engineer working for a civilian firm with a base contract. He was smart and funny and had an easy confidence that I found attractive, partly because it was so unlike the rigid professional posture I wore for most of my waking hours. He cooked well. He had strong opinions about architecture and almost no opinions about football, which after years of forced team bonding over games I did not particularly care about felt genuinely refreshing. We were happy for a while, maybe 3 years, maybe 4. It is hard to say exactly when happiness becomes maintenance, and maintenance becomes something quieter and more careful than that. You stop noticing the transition until you are already on the other side of it, and looking back, trying to identify the exact moment things changed. Usually, you cannot find it. Usually, it was not a moment at all, but a gradual accumulation of small distances that each seemed manageable on their own. We divorced when I was 36. No single explosion. No dramatic confrontation, just the slow accumulated weight of 2 people who had grown in directions that no longer overlapped. He resented the moves. I understood that. I did, but I could not change what the Air Force required, and I had never pretended otherwise. He resented the weeks I was unreachable, the promotions that came with longer hours and more travel, and less of me available for the life we had built together in whatever city we happened to be living in that year. The version of me that existed at work, which he sometimes said felt more real than the version that came home at night and ate dinner without fully arriving. The divorce was civil. The attorneys were professional. The agreement was negotiated over 2 months and signed without drama, or so I thought. The military retirement system is specific about how pension division works in divorce. A spouse who was married to a service member for at least 10 years, with at least 10 of those years overlapping with military service, is eligible for direct payment of their portion from the Defense Finance and Accounting Service. Eric and I had been married for 8 years. He did not qualify for direct payment. What he did qualify for, under the terms of our divorce decree, was a fixed percentage of my retirement pay as it stood at the time of our divorce. We had agreed on the percentage together. Both attorneys reviewed the calculation. Both of us signed the final document. The letter from his new attorney argued that the agreement should be revisited. Specifically, it argued that my subsequent promotion to lieutenant colonel, which had occurred 14 months after our divorce was finalized, had materially changed the retirement benefit in question, and that Eric deserved a recalculation based on the higher rank. I read that argument very carefully the second time. Then I called my JAG attorney, Major Sandra Holloway, who had helped me navigate the original divorce agreement and with whom I had maintained a professional relationship because in military legal matters, maintaining relationships with good attorneys is simply sensible practice. She answered on the second ring. I read her the relevant section of the letter. There was a brief silence. She said, "That is not how divorce decrees work." I said, "That was my understanding as well. She said she would review the letter and call me back within the hour. She called back in 40 minutes and confirmed what I already knew. The agreement was binding. The percentage was fixed at the time of signing. A post-divorce promotion did not create grounds for renegotiation under Virginia law or under the Uniformed Services Former Spouses Protection Act. Eric's attorney was either poorly briefed or fishing for a reaction. I thanked her. I set the phone down on my desk. I thought about Eric for a moment. About the man who had eaten vending machine dinners with me during late contracting reviews. About the man who had driven me to the airport at 4 a.m, more times than I could count, and never once complained about the hour. About the man who had learned my exact coffee order down to the specific temperature so precisely that he could make it without asking, even on the mornings I had not yet decided what I wanted. That man and the man whose attorney was currently drafting letters about my pension were the same person. People contain more than one version of themselves. The part that loves you and the part that, when the love is over and something valuable is sitting on the table, reaches for any leverage it can find. Most of us contain both. Some of us are better than others at keeping the second part quiet, at recognizing when it is driving and choosing not to let it steer. Eric had stopped making that choice. I sent a formal response through my own attorney within 2 weeks. Clear, specific, legally grounded, not hostile. The decree was valid and enforceable. The promotion did not alter the agreed calculation. We considered the matter resolved and expected no further correspondence on the subject. Eric's attorney sent another letter. This one was longer and less legally precise and more emotionally constructed, which in my experience meant the legal argument had run out of traction, and they were hoping that tone would accomplish what substance could not. It mentioned the years Eric had supported my career, the relocations he had accommodated without complaint, the professional opportunities he had declined or deferred so that my assignments could take priority, the personal costs he had absorbed over 8 years so that I could continue advancing. I read that paragraph 3 times, not because it surprised me, because I wanted to be honest with myself about whether any of it was true before I decided how to respond. I did not want to dismiss something real simply because it was being used as a legal argument. Some of it was true. He had relocated twice. He had found work in both locations eventually, but the transition had been genuinely hard each time. The kind of hard that leaves marks in a person's professional confidence and in their sense of where their own life is headed. He had accommodated things that many spouses would not have accommodated, and I had known that, and been grateful for it throughout our marriage. But gratitude for the years of a marriage is not the same as ongoing financial liability for the years after it ends. We had agreed on terms that accounted for those contributions. The terms were fair, and both attorneys had confirmed they were fair, and both of us had signed them with full knowledge of what they contained. The fact that my career continued to develop after our divorce was not a debt I owed him. It was simply what happened when I kept showing up and doing my job. I asked Sandra to send another response. Still clear, still specific, still firm. Professional in the way that makes clear there is nothing personal in the refusal, just a settled position that will not move. 3 months of silence followed. The silence was not the end of it. I learned that from a fellow officer, Lieutenant Colonel Patricia Dunn, who had navigated her own post-divorce legal complications a few years earlier and warned me over coffee that silence from an opposing attorney often meant they were gathering different ammunition rather than accepting the situation. She was right. What came next was not another letter. It was a phone call to my base from someone identifying himself as a journalist researching a story about military promotion practices. He asked to speak with the Public Affairs Office about Lieutenant Colonel Monica Reyes. He mentioned, casually and specifically, a connection to an ongoing legal dispute involving her retirement benefits. The Public Affairs Officer called me within the hour. I sat in my office and listened to the description of the call and felt something specific move through me that I want to try to name accurately. It was not panic. I had been in situations that produced actual panic, and I knew what that felt like. And this was different. It was more like the feeling of recognizing a pattern, the particular pattern you see in long negotiations, when the other party has decided that direct pressure is not producing results and has shifted to trying to generate external pressure through channels that are harder to defend against formally. Eric was trying to make noise in a place where noise could cost me something real. I called Sandra that afternoon. She made some calls of her own. The journalist, such as he was, did not publish anything. Whether he was a legitimate reporter who found the story had no substance or someone operating more directly on behalf of Eric's legal strategy, I never determined with certainty. It did not matter. What mattered was that the approach had been attempted and had produced nothing, and I needed to be prepared for the next approach, whatever form it took. I spent that evening at my kitchen table with a yellow legal pad writing down everything I knew about the situation in precise chronological order. Every letter and its date, every phone call and its content, every attorney communication and its response. The kind of documentation that transforms a feeling of threat into a manageable file with clear edges. The kind of work I had been doing professionally for 16 years in procurement negotiations, where the details you failed to record were reliably the details that eventually cost you most. By 10 that night, the legal pad had 12 pages. I felt considerably better than I had at 4 that afternoon. The next development arrived 6 weeks later, and it was the one that required a genuinely different kind of response. My work phone buzzed during a morning briefing. I glanced at the screen out of professional habit and saw a name from the base legal office I did not immediately recognize. I let it go to voicemail. After the briefing, I stepped into an empty hallway and checked the message. It was a sergeant asking me to call back regarding a complaint that had been filed with the Inspector General office. I stood in that hallway and listened to the message a second time. Inspector General. I called back immediately. The complaint alleged that I had used my position as a contracting officer to improperly direct business toward a firm with which I had a personal relationship. The firm named was one I had worked with legitimately across several contract cycles over multiple years. The alleged personal relationship referenced a social connection with one of the firm's senior employees. The allegation was false, specifically and demonstrably false. But false allegations filed with the right offices create formal reviews. Formal reviews create administrative holds. Administrative holds affect promotions. And a promotion to full colonel was sitting in my personnel file at that moment, awaiting final processing. The timing was not coincidental. I called Sandra within 20 minutes. I also called a civilian attorney named James Whitfield, who specialized in military administrative law and who Patricia Dunn had recommended specifically because he understood how IG complaints could be weaponized as leverage in the context of unresolved civil disputes. He had seen the pattern before. James told me to pull every document connected to every contract I had ever managed that involved that firm. Competitive bid records, source selection rationale, approval and review chains, ethics disclosures, recusal documentation where applicable. Everything. I had kept rigorous files across my entire career, not in anticipation of something like this, but because rigorous documentation was simply how I worked, the professional standard I had held myself to since my first contracting assignment. Standing in my home office at 11 on a Tuesday night, surrounded by printed procurement records I had retrieved from archived storage, I was more grateful for that habit than I had ever been for anything. The IG review opened formally the following week. It was real, and it required real cooperation, which I provided completely, immediately, and with full documentation at every step. James told me, the best response to a bad faith complaint is a thoroughly documented good faith record. I had a very good faith record. 11 years of it. The review took 11 weeks. I want to describe those weeks accurately because I think honesty about the difficult parts matters as much as the resolution. I slept badly for the first 2 weeks. I woke at 3 in the morning running through details, checking my memory against my files, thinking through scenarios I hoped would not materialize. The promotion hold was real, and the uncertainty about its duration was real, and there were nights when the weight of the situation landed on me in ways I had not fully anticipated. Not because I doubted my record, but because I had spent 16 years building something, and someone was attempting to use the institution I had served to dismantle it, and that specific combination of things was harder to carry than straightforward external threats had ever been. I ran more than usual during those 11 weeks. Early mornings along the base perimeter trail in the November dark, cold air, 2 layers, navigating the familiar route partly by memory, Running at that hour with cold air hitting your face was one of the more reliable methods I had found over the years for stopping circular thinking and returning to something more functional. I used it as often as the weather and my schedule allowed. I also called my mother twice, not to describe the situation in detail because she did not need to carry the specifics, but because sometimes you need to hear a voice that has known you since before you knew yourself and asked nothing from you in that moment except to exist on the other end of the line. She always asked if I was eating enough. I always said yes. Most of the time, that was true. The IG review concluded with a finding of no substantiated misconduct. Every allegation was reviewed against the documentation, and every allegation failed to survive contact with what had actually happened. The promotion proceeded through final processing. The letter from the Department of the Air Force arrived on a Thursday afternoon. I read it at my desk with my office door closed and sat with it for a moment before doing anything else. Then I walked down the hall to Patricia Dunn's office and knocked. She looked up from her desk. I held up the letter without saying anything. She said, "Good." I said, "Good." She said, "Drink after work?" I said, "After work." We went to the officers' club. It smelled the way officers' clubs always smell, like institutional carpet and old wood and coffee that has been sitting too long, familiar in the way places become familiar when you have spent years moving between bases and found the same smell waiting for you in every one of them. We talked about other things mostly: her daughter's college applications, my sister's new house in Phoenix, a contracting reform proposal that had been moving through the acquisition community for 2 years without resolution. Normal things. The kind of conversation that exists precisely because it does not require anything difficult from either person, and that is its own form of relief. At one point, Patricia said, without looking up from her drink, "He tried to use the institution against you." I said, "Yes." She said, "They do that when the direct route has stopped working and they have run out of legitimate options." I said, "I noticed that." She looked at me then with the kind of directness that comes from 21 years of service and a face that has settled completely into honesty with itself. She said, "You handled it correctly." I said, "I had good files." She laughed, the genuine kind. The civil dispute resolved 4 months after the IG finding. Eric's attorney sent a final letter, notably shorter than all the previous ones, proposing that both parties agree to reaffirm the original decree without modification and consider the matter permanently closed. My attorney sent back one paragraph. We agreed. I signed the paperwork in Sandra's office on a Tuesday afternoon and shook her hand and drove home through early spring traffic with the windows down slightly because the air had just started carrying the first warmth of the season, that particular softness that arrives in Virginia in late March and does not fully commit but gives you enough to know what is coming. I thought about Eric during that drive. Not with anger. I was past anger by then. The way you move past it when it has burned through everything it had to consume and left something quieter and more settled in its place. I thought about the structural engineer who had learned my coffee order without being asked. About the drives to the airport before dawn. About whoever he had been before whatever combination of disappointment and resentment had eventually pointed him toward a strategy designed to use the mechanisms of my own career against me. I did not fully understand it. Probably, I never would. But I understood that it was finished. I pinned on Colonel in a ceremony at Langley on a Friday morning in May. Small ceremony by design. A few colleagues, my sister who had arranged a flight from Phoenix, Patricia Dunn, standing near the back with her coffee cup, giving me the kind of nod that carries meaning when it comes from someone who knows exactly what getting there required. Afterward, I stood in the parking lot in my dress uniform with the silver eagle on my collar, feeling something I want to try to name precisely. Not triumph, not simple relief. Something more like continuity. Like a thread that had been pulled taut and threatened and had held anyway, and was now running forward again in the direction it was always supposed to go. My sister took a photograph. Just me, standing in the morning light, squinting slightly because the sun was behind her and I had not thought to move. I looked tired in that photograph. Happy, but tired. The honest kind of tired that settles on a face after a long stretch of sustained effort has finally released. I keep it on my desk at home. Some mornings I walk past it without looking. Some mornings I stop for a second and think about the 11 weeks and the yellow legal pad and the 3 in the morning moments when the weight of it was harder to carry than I wanted to admit. Then I go make coffee and start the day. 16 years of military service teaches you many things about functioning under pressure, about making decisions with incomplete information, about protecting what you are responsible for when external forces find the weak points and push on them. What it does not automatically teach you is how to apply those same skills to your own life, to the people who once lived close enough to understand exactly where your weak points were, to the specific hurt of having someone use what they knew about you as leverage against you. Eric knew my career mattered to me more than almost anything else I had built. He knew what a promotion hold would cost me, not just professionally, but in the internal way that officers carry their service records as part of their identity. He aimed there deliberately and with some sophistication. What he did not account for was 16 years of documentation habits. The understanding, developed across hundreds of contract negotiations and procurement reviews, that the facts you record carefully are the facts that protect you when someone decides to contest them. The particular kind of calm that comes not from the absence of fear, but from having a file that states clearly and completely what actually happened. I was not fortunate. I was prepared. That distinction matters. If you have stayed with me through all of this, thank you. I know it is not a dramatic story in the way that people expect dramatic stories to unfold. Nobody delivered a speech. Nothing resolved in a single confrontation. What happened was slower and more procedural than that. Letters and responses. Attorney calls at inconvenient hours. 11 weeks of a review that required patience I had to actively maintain. A promotion that arrived on schedule because the record supporting it was exactly what it needed to be. That is what protecting yourself actually looks like most of the time. Not a confrontation in a parking lot. Not a scene at someone's front door. Just the long, patient, unglamorous work of making sure the truth is recorded somewhere that matters, by someone who knows how to use it. Eric brought a lawyer to what he thought was a negotiation he could win. I brought 16 years of good files and the professional habit of never leaving a fact undocumented. I kept what I had earned. I kept what was mine. That was always going to be enough.